the, because I had asked for a copy of the reports on the testing, and all I got was testing of soil that was in Clifton. And now I know what the testing was for. But what I wanted to get was the testing, what's on the Edgewater site, and where things are going from the Edgewater site, and apparently that's not available in terms of, none of that's available to public.
The Edgewater site, the actual park?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said you
Yes.
removed their hot spots and they went down south, correct?
Yes, we did, I believe it's, when we did our initial investigation, the levels of contaminant that were found on the park was posted, I believe, on your website.
But
They include PAH compounds, which are characterized as historic fill. That's what's remaining at the park and being capped. We found other hotspot areas that contain PCBs, hydrocarbons, and 2 metals. And last Tuesday and Wednesday, we hit these hotspots, dug out the material, and disposed of them at a facility. And then those excavations were refilled with clean fill material. So now those levels are under, well, when the actual analysis for all of them come in, they're just starting to come in now. If they are under the DEP limits, they will not have to be registered under the deed restriction. They will be clean. So what the remaining contaminant on the field will be PAHs capped with filter fabric and clean fill.
But, you know, you say, well, we found hotspots, but there's nowhere within the borough of a catalog of what they were, what the levels were, where they were found?
I believe there is. I can certainly furnish
Where
one.
would that be?
I believe it might be on the website. There was a...
No, what you actually did,
Of what we actually did?
and where it was transported to.
I don't recall the name, but it'll certainly be manifested. That just happened last week. We haven't received the manifest yet. It's at a licensed facility. I wasn't in charge of contracting that disposal.
Okay.
But no, that'll ultimately be documented. The actual tonnage that was removed, I believe it was around 26 truckloads of this
Yeah, that's what
hotspot
you had said.
material was removed from the site.
What the resident that was talking about from Hudson Harbor was saying that the soil that was next to the community center, that surrounded the community center, was dug up
Yes,
and put in a pile.
yes.
And then after the hole was dug, which I presume may have been the heavy contaminants, I don't know.
No, those were
That-
just PAH
That
materials.
dirt was replaced on the property. It wasn't taken out.
No, it was PAH contaminated soil. It was stockpiled on the other side, and it's now being utilized to lift the large playing field, and that only is to fit the construction plans.
So when the field is done, we're gonna have a bunch of PAHs still sitting there,
Underneath the filter fabric and 2 feet of clean
and
soil.
only 2 feet of clean fill.
That's what the state
Now, what's
requires.
the safety issue on the PAHs, health-wise?
Health-wise, PAHs are either from coal tar, asphalt, uncombustible materials. They're widely found. Again, pavement is probably the largest. If you have a paved roadway, that contains PAHs. Burning, wood being burnt, the smoke contains PAHs. If you grill a hamburger,
I understand where you're telling me where
Right.
it came from. My question is, what's the health issue in terms of them? Obviously, there's something, or you wouldn't be covering them in,
they are considered a potential carcinogenic.
yeah?
And again, it's exposure and limits of the material. The limits that we found on the field itself are at very low levels. So those are the 2 factors.
And that And that's what I'm asking you for. You found very low levels, and
Yes.
where is that listed somewhere?
I believe it's on the fact sheet that we provided. I have it here.
The entire field? I mean, I know you did borings in certain areas, but,
Mhm, and what we did was list the highest values.
so you're basing all your figures on what was done preliminarily and not on what was actually found when you dug? I mean, you said the one spot, you thought it was only gonna be 30 by whatever, and it wound up being 30 by,
Okay.
which we understand that contaminants travel and,
Mhm.
you know, what you think will be in one area maybe has traveled someplace else.
Okay, what it started
Not
as
bigger.
is, we did test pits and took composite samples out of the test pits, analyzed them and found PAH compounds in them. That was the discovery, the detection. From then, we did additional sampling in other areas to determine if it was site-wide. And we found at that point that they were. Then, what the state requires is what they call a remedial investigation, where you take them at depth and multiple areas and you grid out the field. When we gridded it out, we found out that a large part, not all of it, some of the ball fields were clean, some of the areas that I guess were developed later were fine. But because they were so minor, the state allowed us, under that characterization, to call it historic fill. Once it's called historic fill, there is a remedial action that needs to be taken, and that's covering and capping.
Okay, your potential carcinogens, you said it's based on time, exposure, et cetera.
And limits, yes.
What do you mean limits?
If you have a high level of
Oh,
contaminants,
okay.
these are extremely low levels, just above the state limits.
Okay, and I know that you're not an engineer like Negley is an engineer, I mean, in terms of that kind of engineering. But when we used to talk about the ball field, we were advised by our engineer at the time that you would never stop the ball field from staying level and not going out without putting in a bulkhead. Has that changed?
Again, from an engineering standpoint, I can't really answer that. I know they have imported some rock to build a retaining wall along the shoreline.
Right.
Right, the riprap, correct. The filter fabric will help stabilize the field. The additional drainage that they're putting in will help stabilize the field. The fact that it's being lifted and if you know what they're doing, they're compacting the soil, it'll all help. But ultimately, nature, over time,
We'll expose it.
no, not expose it. That's the idea. Oh, along with the deed notice, this is, we do an annual inspection of the material. That's part of the deed notice. We will come out and measure that the cap is protective, still protective, and that's measuring that it's still 2 feet. If an area is paved and it has a crack in it, it has to be sealed, those types of things. So there is that yearly inspection.
And you said that every day, except for one Saturday, that someone from Terms was there, obviously.
Correct.
It wasn't you every day, but who are some of the people that are there?
By name?
Yeah.
Noah Skida is our health and safety officer. He's there, I would say, 80 to 90% of the time.
Can you spell his last name? I'm sorry.
Skyta.
The other questions I had were about the, what Catherine Gregory testified or presented tonight. When you're talking about the community facilities plans, years ago when we discussed it because of the actual physical limitations of the borough of Edgewater, the Bergen County had said that you should not have a population over 10,000. Now we're talking about not only having a double of that population, so now we're well over 100,000, I mean 10,000. But you're also talking about now building high-rise buildings which although they may not produce children, they're certainly gonna produce people, which is going to increase the amount of need for the community facilities, which obviously we're in trouble already on it. I had a question about the library. Is the library gonna be moved down the south end, like everything else seems to be moving down the south end, and everything, like the DPW and stuff, are all gonna be moved up the north end? Is that how the town's gonna develop now?
No, the library's not relocating. I think what they were talking about was
Doing a
possibly.
second one?
What's that?
A second one, like a
I
satellite?
think she was, I know that it had come up, Mary, that, possibly George Washington School and EBG could provide a classroom or at least a location. It hasn't been discussed with the Board of Ed, but I believe she mentioned a portable library just for job walk and everything else in the south end of town.
So, yeah, I just have a problem with that, because obviously the schools are only open during school hours, and if I'm trying to get to the library in the evening, I don't know how I get into the school to go to the
Well,
library.
the schools aren't anything set in stone there. It was just mentioned.
No,
That's
no,
what
I'm
they-
just
they would-
saying that's an
what
issue.
That's what the board, some board members would prefer to see. Like I said, the school hasn't agreed on anything. It's just something that has been brought up, and the portable, I think she was talking about drop-off. I think that's a big concern for the south end of town. So I think she was talking about a portable drop-off. But not-
Delivery books, you mean?
Or dropping off your books.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the delivering, and they already
Yeah, 'cause
deliver,
they have
they
the-
already
they
deliver,
have
but
the
it's just a
carry out.
drop-off that they could set up somewhere in the south end to accommodate the southern portion.
Okay. And of course, we do have the Old Borough Hall,
Yes.
which would be, another location that would be possible. With the parking lot across the street, you certainly would have more parking than the current library has.
You know what, Mary, honestly, that was a popular amongst the council for the Borough Hall, but I guess after we had received the money for the Carnegie building, it didn't go over so well with the library.
Oh, no, I think we should keep the Carnegie building.
Right, no, well, either way, but it's just a matter of, I agree with you. I think, center of town on River Road, plenty of parking across the street. That was definitely an idea that was mentioned by more than one councilman.
Okay. And it just seems to me, in terms of the land use element, that what we're doing now is that the changes that are being made have actually been driven by the Board of Adjustments variances that have been given, whereas in reality, your master plan is supposed to be done by the planning board and approved by the mayor and council. And it seems to me like the development that's been done in town is now, which of course, I'm not surprised, but the development that's been done in town is now telling us now what our zoning is going to be. Because we have given so many variances that, that's what's driving it. It's not, and it's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be the developers and the things they've come in and asked for and the things that the changes they've been allowed to have drives what your master plan is gonna be, what you want the town to look like. 115 is, I went through all the meetings about the Superfund site, all the meetings with the EPA, and 115, the building 115 is not contaminated. The water underneath it is contaminated. And the reason they swore up and down it wasn't contaminated is because you have a child care center. So I don't know where Ms. Gregory is coming off saying 115, the building's contaminated, and that's why they have to take it down. That was never, ever, ever, ever said in any of the discussions on the content. And I don't understand why that's so, I do understand, I know why, because I know who now owns 115. So I understand why we're gonna get a high rise there. I understand all that. And is, I understand that there's nothing I can do to stop it. But when you're talking about view sheds, high rises do not give you view sheds, sorry. And fortunately for 115, in terms of us, it's across from North Bergen. That's whose views are gonna be blocked, these people from North Bergen. Because that's who owns on the other side of the street. And I'm sure that's the theory behind it. Who cares about North Bergen? The other thing is, in terms of studies, there was a study done many years ago that said, for every dollar you get in new housing development, you spend $1.67 in services. More housing, more people moving in does not drop your taxes, it increases it. So when you're talking about building high-rise buildings, you're talking about taxes going up. When you're talking about taking away the commercial and retail and putting in housing, your taxes are going up. There's no way about it. I mean, our population has doubled in terms of the census that we're talking about here. And we want to put more high-rise in? You know, what's going to be sufficient? 20,000 people living in this town? And taxes is certainly will be. And I understand, you know, people want this to be New York. And the rents will be New York. And properties will be worth what New York is worth. But I just don't think the town can support it. I just don't, I think your community facilities shows you cannot support that kind of a population.
So, for every dollar of, can you go through that again?
For every dollar of tax, I'm sorry?
No, I'm saying it's an opinion, or it's.
No, it was.
It's the Rutgers, it's a Rutgers study.
It's
It's
a
a
Rutgers
Rutgers
study.
study.
School was a
For every
Rutgers.
dollar
$1.67.
$1.60.
Actually,
of
for,
taxes, for every dollar of construction?
For every dollar of tax money you bring in,
Bring in
you
$1.
spend $1.67 in services, the town. You know, garbage, fire, ambulance, all
Well,
that, schools.
Can't be necessarily true, because then we'd be over budget.
Well, then I guess
You
the
are.
school,
We're not,
then I guess
there
the
you are.
school.
That's why the taxes went
not
up.
66%. Doesn't make any sense, that number doesn't jive.
Let's see.
Okay. Well, you know, you agree with the Rutgers studies on the school.
I agree with our numbers right here.
You agree
I
with
have
that?
the budget.
But,
I know what we spent the last 3 or 4 years.
you know, I agree with them because I know where we're going.
We have numbers.
But my taxes are going up.
Okay, but.
My taxes have gone up every year.
I have everything.
And I think that as the population gets bigger, and I'm sorry that I'm bothering you, Mr. Henwood, you know, and taking your time up.
No, the 5-minute limit is a 5-minute limit, I think we need to hold it. I mean, to be fair to you and everyone else.
There's such a crowd here.
Valerie Bardenas, 16 Hudson Terrace. I just, the report was a Rutgers report, and it was quoted by former Governor Corzine when he, in one of his addresses. And when you talk about your budget hasn't gone up, your budget actually has gone over. That's why, let me just finish. As a taxpayer, as a resident property taxpayer, I can tell you, my property taxes have more than 100% doubled, more than 100%. Within, let me think, from 1999 to 2012, they might have even actually tripled. And you can look at that. So that is, your budget is what drives your taxes. We pay taxes for the budget you pass. It's really easy. The other thing is, and I just want to reiterate what Ms. Hogan said about as far as school children, and yeah, I do think that's really important consideration of the type of building how many more children we're bringing into the town. Not that I have anything against children, I love them, but that's not the only consideration. The consideration is the services you have to provide, which are police, fire department, and yes, you know, our fire department is our volunteers, but they need equipment and it's their time. And there's a whole slew of services you have to provide. That's why it becomes, the economics of it, actually, mixed use is a better idea, because when you do have retail, you don't have to provide schools, you don't have to provide all those necessary services. I just would like to ask the gentlemen just a few questions I have. You had said DEH was bigger, it was in a bigger area than you had estimated?
DEPH, yes.
DEP?
EPH,
Wait, I'm sorry.
extractable petroleum pipe.
EEPH?
EPH,
Okay, and what does that stand for?
extractable petroleum hydrocarbons.
Extractable petroleum hydrocarbons?
Yes,
And so is that part of the hotspot?
it was one, yes.
It was, and
Yes.
those were removed?
Yes,
And then PAH?
PAH is
And what does PAH stand for?
polyaromatic hydrocarbons.
Wait a minute, poly?
Aromatic,
Aromatic hydrocarbons. Okay, so that, you had said that you're using, the PAH contamination is being used for the grade?
for a lift, yes.
So polyaromatic hydrocarbons are going to be, are where you take them, and then, and I guess maybe that's what a resident saw, you know, being piled up.
Correct.
And then spread out.
Correct.
And then you're going to put a filter?
A filter fabric, a
filter-
geotech style fabric, which prevents the blending of the soils.
Permanently,
Yes,
forever,
I don't know what's
Perpetuity.
forever. But,
perpetuity,
but again, there will be an annual inspection.
an annual inspection?
Yes,
Okay.
which
And
is part
so-
of the deed notice.
Okay, and where approximately in the area there in the park will the PAH be?
Entire.
In the entire, okay? And then, so then you put that, you put a filter, and then you put soil over it?
Clean fill, yes. correct.
And the clean fill is coming from where?
The material that has been brought in so far was off of construction site on Route 3 in Clifton.
So you took the fill from Route 3 and you brought it here, and that's going to be our clean fill. Have you seen the report
Yes,
from Route 3?
yes,
There are also substances in that fill, because Ms. Hogan has the report, we were looking at it. It's not totally clean fill.
the material that
That's
was
why it's
in,
being, go ahead, I'm
no, the
sorry.
material that was brought in was pre-tested by another environmental company, Dewberry, for Creamer and Sanzari. I went out to the site myself and sampled the material that was being imported from a segregated pile. So that is the material that has entered the site. And that
Have you
all-
read the report? Have you read the report
Yes.
from the material? You've read
Oh, yeah.
the report that
Yeah.
was used from Route 3?
Yes,
Okay, do you have a background in environmental sciences? Okay, what's going to be different then? Like, because it seems like we're still going to have PAH, we're going to have a fill that still has substances according to that report. We're doing all this, what's going to be different? How is this going to be environmentally
well, the
safer?
difference was the material that was tested and brought on site is clean. All contaminants were below the level, and in fact, most of them were non-detect. So the difference is a clean fill will cover the PAH, and that is a state guideline.
And I know this question was asked, I'm just not sure, I didn't understand the answer. Are there documents actually where one can view maybe a grid of, that you're working off of now, that shows where you removed, where you replaced, what portion is, you know, with the cap, what portion was okay?
Yes.
There's-
As the work was being done, Neglia Engineering, they had their surveyors out there, because ultimately, as the park changes, I will have to put a monitoring well in one of the locations, so that was very important to us to coordinate. You know, we did measure, but things move, you know, guidelines, so we have those locked in, of the hotspot areas where they were.
I'm just really very concerned because, you know, we just had a whole big thing with, down by Overpeck Park where fill was used from another place that wasn't clean. and
Oh,
now.
no, I understand that. In
I-
fact,
I'm
I
just-
reviewed
I'm
quite a few
concerned now because
sites
I was looking at that report.
that we didn't allow to come in, or it just didn't pass criteria. So that was the only site so far that's been allowed to be.
Are your samplings?
Yes.
Where do you send your samplings?
Alpha Labs in Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts?
Yes.
And would I be able to get the name of that? I don't mean this moment, but. I can
Alpha
get it from-
Analytical, yeah.
That's the one that came from Route 3.
No, that's some of them.
Yeah, because that's the lab that's reporting.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, when you read the actual analyticals, there are numbers generated. There are qualifiers next to it which have
Yeah.
used. Those are undetected, so those showed no contaminants in those.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Dennis?
Today I was at the community center, with the tree being taken down. Well, that was taken down today. But is, if you're looking directly at the community center, it's around the side, the back entrance, or if you go to the back entrance, or where they have that round table a lot of times.
On the North side, you're saying on
No.
the east side of the, I mean, the west side of the community center?
On
Going
the
in
east side, on the east side.
Where the playground was,
Yeah.
is what you're saying, right? Where the playground was?
Well, it's-
Looking at
it's-
the community
it's-
center on the right.
It's on a notch, you know, if you sit standing here looking directly at the thing, it's back here. You know, you go in, down to the, you go into where the, as far as where the reception person
The
is.
front entrance?
Yes, front entrance.
Okay.
Go in, take a
And
left.
then you go to, or you-
Left.
oh, right.
I'm sorry, right, the other right. Anyway, back there, there's like a notch, and actually it's next to where you have the opening for the Little League. And that
Correct.
sort of thing. So there was a beautiful tree there, and in the time we were sitting there, they came in and tore this tree down. I mean, just levered it out of the ground and took it away. I'm just curious, was that part of the project? I sat through a lot of this and didn't hear anything about that particular area.
Well, you know what, Dennis, I know we made an attempt to save every tree we could.
I know. I think that,
And
from what I can see, it's been largely successful, at least the way it's.
I'm not familiar with the tree you're talking about, but I'm sure, you know, unfortunately, there were some we had to take out. I don't have an explanation for
Okay,
that.
well, I don't want to make a deal out of it.
Yeah.
It's just, I was surprised. I mean, we just happened to be sitting there, and this thing took place while we were sitting there, and like a homicide going on almost, you know, because it was a beautiful tree, and I don't know. But I know this is probably for the school board, but do we have any projections, or do we know how many students we got this year as opposed to last year? Is it a dramatic increase, or?
I know there was an increase right up to the day the school opened.
Yeah.
As far as a specific number, I don't have it. Dennis, I'm sure we could get that from the school board.
Yeah. I just overheard something, and it was like, there aren't a whole lot, there's not a whole lot more room in there. That we might have 3 spare rooms. I don't know if there's anything to this. I actually just happened to overhear this. But anyway, I am very curious.
I'm not sure what you said.
How close we are to filling that new school up. You know? Are we gonna have to start planning on And there's a lot of surveying going on River Road. Surveying,
Okay.
you know. Almost every day I see them somewhere in town surveying. So is this related to, is this the county saying they want to widen River Road? Do you know what's going on?
Actually, I don't know, I haven't seen any, but I'm out early in the morning, Dennis, but I know I had read the paper in regards to bicycle paths or you know, potential widening from Fort Lee down, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure who you're speaking of or who's doing the survey.
Yeah.
We could definitely get an answer, right?
Yeah, I think it'd be in our best interest
Okay.
to find out exactly what's going on before. Does the town have a facility to have silent alarms for privacies? You know, like, specifically, there's an alarm that goes off every so often in town. It's fairly close to where I live. And it generally takes about 15 to 20 minutes for the police to arrive and get it turned off. It's very loud.
Is it a residence or?
Yes,
Okay.
very loud. And it's happened repeatedly. It goes on for 15, 20 minutes. And if you're just sitting there for that length of time and you happen to be, live right next to it, so the question is, do we have the ability to have a silent alarm? Is it something that the town has a facility for?
Well, you know what, we'll have to ask, we'll find out tomorrow, we'll ask about it. I don't have the answer.
They don't come into the municipal.
They don't.
Do we have an alarm, right? If you have so many false alarms, you get a ticket.
Yeah, coincidentally, I've spoken to the chief about that as well, and he says that right now, that is the most reliable source or form of getting the attention of the firemen to meet in the
No,
event.
he's talking about the police.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Private.
so the amount of
Private
residents.
homes.
Police.
I'm sorry.
There's got to be an answer there has to be something. If there isn't, there should be, or will be.
Yeah.
Can't be following like that, it's not right. So I would take it with him and go from there. I mean,
So police station. Did you say condone?
well, I don't know, I'm asking, is that an option? Whatever it is, it's not right, you should be held.
Yeah.
I think those summons come from the police.
Code enforcement.
That's, thank you.
If anyone else wish to be heard, Michael?
Yeah, I just want to repeat briefly what I said last
Could
week.
you state your name and address, please?
Yeah, Michael Messeri, I own property in Shadyside, 264, 266 Old River Road. I want to repeat briefly what I said last week. In planning board, I was the only member of the public, so the other opinion wasn't there, of course, only my opinion. The planner was getting some arguments about high rises from a few members of the planning board, and I brought up my experience. So I told the story of two neighborhoods and high rises. Neighborhood number one, the negative story, is Avalon. I mean, after the Alcoa building was demolished, which was a massive undertaking, finally, from River Road, you could see Undercliff Avenue, and the people from Undercliff Avenue, for the first time maybe in their lifetime, could see New York. And then there was, and the original proposal was for high rises with view corridors that would have enabled view sheds. There was huge objection in town, and now you have the wall on Undercliff Avenue, which is maybe 600 to 700 feet long, and you see nothing. Well, a high-rise saved the neighborhood is right here in Shadyside. The original, after this island piece was created by the relocation of River Road, there was an island piece created between Old River Road and New River Road of quite a few acres. First, the congregate facility came, the two tall buildings at the south end, and then the official plan of the town called for if you imagine Avalon, exactly the same type of development from the congregate curve all the way down to Thompson Lane. So Shadyside is not as long as Avalon, it's about 400 feet. And then came a proposal to take this density, and there was no change in density. Density remains the same. And turn this building upside down, make a high-rise out of it, and open up Shadyside. It was a big fight. A few members of the public here participated.
I was a council person then.
Yeah, you were the council.
Along with
Mary
the
also
former-
was on the
Along
council.
with the former mayor.
Correct. And I think we made some very strong arguments, and what was called the Chinese wall was raised, became the high-rise, you see. And Shadyside now was visible. The developer offered the park, the parking with only one deck, so from River Road you can see Shadyside. And I can tell you that from this day on, every property in Shadyside, which was ready to be knocked down, renovated itself. And the feedback I'm getting today is that Shadyside is one of the most charming neighborhoods in town. Well, it's not true. There are plenty other charming neighborhoods in town, but you don't see them. Shadyside you see, because a high-rise came and opened it up. And it has nothing to do with density. It's how do you take a given density and build it on a piece of property. And last example, I just noticed it in the last few days. When you go out, you see these two new buildings on High Park, the two new ones. They're massive, and the view corridor is very narrow. Just imagine to yourself what would have happened if the same number of apartments would have gone higher, doubled up the height of the building, and increase the distance between the buildings. You could have seen much more. Thank you.